episode is from the news, npr.org. You can find the link to what I am reading in the description for the video on YouTube. The headline: How protesters in China bypass online censorship to express dissent. How protesters in China bypass online censorship to express dissent. Again, you can find the link to what I am going to read, to what I will read in the description section of the YouTube channel. Every video has a description section, and every description section has a link to something that I will read for each episode. How protesters in China bypass online censorship to express dissent. This is from a few months ago. Today is the 15th of March, 2023. This is from December 8th, 2022. Manuela Lopez Restrepo, or Restrepo, however, whichever accent you want, because this is not English or Portuguese, is Spanish. Let's see, one more time. The headline: How protesters in China bypass online censorship to express dissent. Now, from the article. Again, you can find the link in the description for each video on YouTube. Although protests in China have now successfully convinced government officials to loosen enforced COVID-19 restrictions, anybody expressing their dissent in person or online has to do so while navigating their country's notoriously strict censors. After a deadly apartment fire in the city of Urumqi left at least 10 dead in late November, many questioned whether long-standing COVID restrictions limiting mobility within buildings could be blamed, which became a national conversation about the sustainability of the country's zero COVID measures. Protesters then took to the streets and social media, risking their livelihoods and academic careers to demand a loosening of restrictions. Some even called for the newly reinstated president of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, to step down from his position, a move of civil disobedience that is considered particularly drastic given the potential consequences, including legal charges. I'm skipping the next paragraph now under the advertisement. Here we go. Continuing. Chinese social media platforms like WeChat, Sina Weibo, and Douyin are heavily censored and monitored for rule-breaking content. They also require users to link their national ID information to any accounts they create. As a result, Webster says users have had to become creative in expressing any views critical of the Chinese government. I'm not going to read anymore, but they are using different technology and VPNs to get around their censorships. So again, you can find the link to what I just read in the description section. Coming up, all things English. We're going to look at the vocab and the grammar for a little bit. If that's too boring, chato, or easy for you, skip to the end. The final segment will be questions and conversation about censorship, about this specific story in China, but also Brazil definitely has. That's definitely a active topic here. So censorship. Coming up in the next segment, all things English. Protesters in China bypass online censorship to express dissent. That is the headline we opened with. We read a few paragraphs from the story from npr.org. Now we're going to review the English. If this is too easy for you, skip ahead and you will find the questions and conversation at the end. But for people who are struggling or fighting to understand some of the content, we're going to review all of the English that we can, which is not all of the English, but most of the more difficult pieces. So in the headline, bypass, BYPASS, one word, how protesters in China bypass online censorship to express dissent. To bypass something is to pass by it, to avoid it, to get around it, or whatever it is. Usually a rule or restriction or regulation or some obstruction of someone's desired plan or action. So we're going to go with ignorar, evitar, iludir, to avoid or get around something. Dissent, dissidência. So expressing or having or holding an opinion that is in opposition to the majority or to the actual rules that represent the majority, even though it might not actually, but if it's the rule, then it is part of the majority, disposition. Notoriously strict censors. This is in the first sentence. It's just one big sentence. It's the first paragraph, but it's one big sentence. Anybody expressing their dissent in person or online has had to do so while navigating their country's notoriously strict censors. Censores notoriamente rígidos. Very vigilant and rigid censors. To loosen. To loosen. Oh, where's loosen? I don't see loosen yet. We'll come back to that. Long standing. Long standing. After a deadly, this is the second paragraph, after a deadly apartment fire in the city of Urumqi, I think that's how you pronounce it, Urumqi, left at least 10 dead in late November. Many questioned whether long-standing COVID restrictions could be blamed. Long-standing is an expression, it's an adjective that means traditional, old, well-established, fixed, not new, basically. These are not new. De longa data. That's what I came up with. I had to search that one. De longa data. Whether or not the COVID restrictions could be blamed. Podia ter culpado. Podia ter culpado. To be blamed. Blamed. Culpado. Blame. Culpo. Or guilt, right? Could be responsible for that apartment fire. 10 people died, and people are questioning or, perguntando, questionando, hey, 10 people died in an apartment. Is this parte do culpo? Pode ser para as restrições do Covid bem rígidos. So they wondering whether they could be blamed. Taken to the streets. Protesters then took to the streets and social media. To take to the streets is almost literal, right? You can't take streets, but you take to the streets. So manifestar, nas ruas, ir para as ruas, redes sociais. And in the redes sociais, that is a protest in China because of the strict censorship. Livelihood, risking their livelihoods. Your livelihood, which is LIVELIHOODS, livelihoods. Livelihood is your way or means of surviving, of paying bills, of feeding yourself and your family, of having decent health, putting living in a house or apartment. So subsistência, a vida, os meios de vida, right? Kind of a mix between work and your ability to function as a normal human being. Heavily censored. Uh, heavily censored would be fortemente censurado. Fortemente censurado. Fortemente censurado. Heavily. We use this as strongly, right? It's raining heavily. Fortemente chovendo. It is, there is a heavy snow, neve forte, or fortemente nevando. So heavy would be fortemente when we use it as an adverb. To link, I believe this is in the final paragraph I read. Chinese social media platforms like WeChat, Sina Weibo, and Douyin are heavily censored, there we go, and monitored for rule breaking content. They also require new users to link their national ID to any accounts they create. So link is vincular, right? To connect. To connect. That is all I'm going to review. There might be more English doubts that you have or questions. Leave them in the comments. You can leave me feedback, right? And tell me exactly what's most difficult for you. And I will be responsive and also include your doubts in any future episodes, right? Because this is all reciclagem. Todo, de ensinar inglês é reciclagem, reciclagem, reciclagem. Todo o conteúdo, todas as perguntas e palavras que eu acho mais difíceis ou mais tricky, mais difficult, eu estou refletindo das aulas que eu estou dando faz 4 anos aqui mesmo no Brasil e 1 ano para brasileiro mesmo em San Diego e 2 anos em Barcelona e 2 anos antes disso. So it's just a database of what has been most difficult for people, like en verbs, for example, loosen, tighten, um, harden, soften. Those are difficult words, notoriamente difícil para pessoas aprendendo inglês de português ou espanhol, porque não tem essas sons, esse tipo de verbo com en no português ou espanhol. Um, so there are certain things that if you tell me your doubts, I can include them in all future episodes. But coming up next, questions and conversation about censorship, about the Chinese, zero COVID policies, but mostly about censorship. Coming up. How protesters in China bypass online censorship to express dissent. How protesters in China get around or avoid or elude online censorship to express dissent. That was the headline that this episode has been based on. Right now, we're doing questions and conversation about the topic of censorship, Chinese zero COVID, well, mostly censorship, to be honest. Question number one: do you bypass any laws in Brazil? Typically, maybe not all the time, but sometimes or generally. Do you bypass any laws in Brazil? Typically, are you speeding in your car? That would be bypassing a law. To be speeding, right after the the monitor, right after the camera, right? You go slow for the camera, and then you speed up faster than the speed limit. That would be bypassing the driving velocity regulations. Are you smoking some maconha? You having a joint, right? Are you having a joint at night or with friends? That would be bypassing drug regulations or laws in Brazil. So what are you doing? Are you bypassing any laws in Brazil? I don't expect you to be publicly saying the things that you're doing, but reflect. What laws are you bypassing in your life in Brazil? Let me ask this. Bypass. I did not prepare for this word actually. So what would this word be? To bypass, iludir, right? Contornar, to bypass a law, contornar a lei. But let's just see bypass. We're doing ignorar, evitar, iludir. Yeah, okay. Se você contorna or ilude leis ou regulações no Brasil, tipicamente ou geralmente, or às vezes. Number two, are there any restrictions or rules or laws that you would loosen if you could? This is a good question to practice modals, right? Are there any restrictions or rules or laws that you would loosen if you could? Se existe, se tem algumas regulações ou restrições ou regras, ou as leis que você relaxaria se você pudesse. For me, number one, maconha. I would absolutely change that rule anywhere in Brazil, anywhere I'm living. I would loosen that restriction. I would loosen, and this is probably very unpopular in Brazil. I understand that, but I would loosen the restrictions on abortion before the third trimester, and in any case where the woman's life is at risk, or if the baby's birth is questionable or impossible, live birth. What other restrictions? Yeah. Where else could we go in Brazil? Mesmo. I would loosen the regulations on importation of goods, right? Brazil has these crazy fucking taxes on things coming from outside of Brazil into Brazil. And I don't know the rationale, raciocínio, the reasoning, but buying anything outside, when you import it into Brazil, you have to pay like 70 fucking percent of the original price. So you're basically paying for two items, and it makes no sense. It's it if they're not producing these things in Brazil and not producing them at cost and at scale, then you should be able to buy them wherever it's the cheapest. And the protectionary, importation tax on items is just bad for people. I don't understand that. It's very strict protectionism that I don't think is good for people who need to buy shit from other places sometimes. So, what about you? Are there any restrictions? Se existe algumas restrições, regras, leis que você relaxaria se você pudesse? How do you understand the meaning of the word censorship? What does that word mean? How do you individually understand it? Some people have very different understandings of what censorship means. Some people think it means Facebook telling you that you're suspended because you called someone a Nazi, or you called someone the N word, right? And this is now American English, palavrões. Some people think it means getting canceled. You've been canceled by companies or your sponsorship, or you can't be monetized on a platform like YouTube or Facebook. And then, there's a more traditional censorship of the government telling you you can't express dissent, you can't express any opinion that's in conflict, regardless of the veracity, sem importância, a veracidade da informação que você está compartilhando na internet. Não pode se está ao contrário do narrativo do governo, right? So, what does censorship mean to you? How do you understand that word? What do you think about? Do que você pensa quando você ouvir ou ler a palavra censorship no inglês? Should the internet be censored at all? Why or why not? O internet deveria ser censurado em qualquer jeito? Porque sim? Porque não? Should the internet be censored at all? What do you think about censorship of internet content? And you could imagine this by, I think it's, when I wrote the question, the intention, a pretensão foi de pensar do governo. Do you think the government should be censoring the internet at all? If you think yes, why? And y como? If you think no, why not? Why not? If you were forced to personally be in charge of online censorship for the government, what things or content would you focus on? So, this one you have to use your imagination, right? Maybe, talvez você está contra censuração do conteúdo na internet, mas tem que imaginar para essa pergunta. Ou não precisa dar resposta, but imagine that you, for some reason, needed or must censor you individually content on the internet. What things or conteúdo, what things or content would you focus on? Se você estava forçado para pessoalmente ter o cargo de censurar a internet para governo, quais tipos de coisas e conteúdo você focaria? I think I have to ask that again. Forçar. Se você fosse forçado, se você fosse forçado para pessoalmente ter cargo de censurar a internet, what things or content would you focus on? So I am not pro censorship. Typically, I believe in no censorship from the government. But I do agree with censoring content that is verifiably false, especially in certain arenas: healthcare, public health, lies about medical information and medical developments. Censor that shit. Lies about democratic elections, machines, voter fraud. Censor that shit. I'm sick of it. Censor it. Censor that shit. What else? I guess we already do censor things that are damaging to people's own personal reputations, but generally it's not automatic government censorship. That's something that você tem que ir no tribunal, né, civil nos Estados Unidos para contestar alguma coisa que alguém falou na internet que você está falando foi uma danificação para a sua reputação e também é falso com prova. So that too, I think, is already it's a different type of censorship. Someone has to ask for that content, right? In the U.S., it's called libel and also slander. I don't remember the difference between libel and slander, but these are rules against rules for censorship of content and penalties for people who damage other people's reputations because they are lying. That is the important detail. It has to be a verifiable lie. Um, and believe it or not, I do believe there are verifiable lies. Not everything is, you know, it's my opinion or belief. Well, you could be wrong. Yeah, you could be wrong. The final question: does censorship work? Você acha que o censuração? I gotta look at this. What is censorship? Does censorship work? What do you think? Censorship. Censura, right? Isso é mais simples que censuração. Censuration. Se você acha que censura funciona, censura funciona sim ou não? O que você acha e por quê? I think censorship does work a little bit. I think it depends on the content being censored and whether or not it's true or not. I think you will always have crazy fucking people who believe that Joe Biden stole an election when it's verifiably false. So I don't think it works in the sense of vai trocar mente de todo mundo que acredita numa conspiração. Para essas pessoas, nada vai funcionar. I don't think anything will work for some people. I think some people are fucked in the head or, prone or vulnerável à informação que tem sabor de doce, mas é ruim. So I don't think censorship is a tool that will eliminate misinformation, but I do think it works in stopping the spread of misinformation to mainstream channels. And when something is on mainstream channels, whether it's the radio, whether it's TV news, whether it's social media websites and meme factories, I think those have an effect on the mainstream opinions, and that is damaging for democracy when falsehoods and lies can become mainstream, and people who are not good at doing internet, that are not good at using the internet or assessing or avaliando informação, it works on those people. So I think when I say it works, I mean bad information works if it keeps coming and coming and coming. E não tem contexto de veracidade. I think censorship is needed in some areas. So that's what I think. What do you think? Give me your thoughts on censorship. We did not talk about Chinese zero COVID and whether or not you ever believe. Let me ask the question now. It's not on the sheet that I'm reading for some of these questions, but let me ask you. China has been saying or using a zero COVID policy, with lots of government authority to authorize strict restrictions. What do you think about that? Is it a good idea or a bad idea to use to have authoritarian rules about public health, where people are literally locked in their houses, not, hey, you can go outside, but you can't be going to your friend's house or to the bar. No, literally locked into their houses. So what do you think about Chinese zero COVID policy? O que você acha do zero COVID, os policias, as restrições zero COVID na China? Thanks for listening. I don't know if the sound is great today. It sounds like I'm in a human stomach with fluids going through the walls and construction, banging outside. But let me know if the sound is very bad. I listened to the episodes, pieces of them, not all of them. But inscrever, subscribe, inscrevi, leave a comment, a like, a dislike, anything. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to engage in the comments if you